Welcome to our segment where we talk about the Bible and science. Please remember that science points us to God because God is the creator of all the universe and we see his fingerprints throughout his creation. Now, the Gobi Desert borders Mongolia and China. Very large desert, and there was a find of a velociraptor. A velociraptor was fighting with a protoceratops. And so I've tried to put pictures there of these dinosaurs, and they seemed to be, as I said, fighting. They were in a fight to the death. And this is the first discovery of this kind of find. Now, we have found so many fossils of dinosaurs across the world, but this was the very first discovery of two dinosaurs who died while it looked like they were fighting with each other. Now, we have found others since this find, but it was the first one. And they were buried in a sandy sediment, and they were fossilized very quickly or rapidly. Now, archaeologists have found hundreds of other dinosaurs in the Gobi Desert that were quickly fossilized. And when we say they were quickly fossilized, it had to happen quickly. Now, why is this archaeological find so important? Well, the discovery is significant because the dinosaurs, because they look like they were embroiled in a fight together, it had to happen quickly for them to be buried together and then fossilized together. Now, the question then is how does two dinosaurs die at the same time and then are quickly buried in this sandy soil, and then they're fossilized together? Well, evolutionists will give several explanations for finding these two dinosaurs fossilized together. Well, the first explanation is that they collapsed in they were in a sand dune that collapsed together. And so the problem with this explanation is that sand dunes do not contain the water that's needed to replace the minerals in the bones for fossilization on a large scale. And then there are hundreds of other dinosaurs found in the Gobi Desert. And so the question then is, did they all die in collapsing sand dunes also? There's never been any evidence that dinosaurs could be fossilized rapidly in a collapsing sand dune. And again, the big issue is there's no water in that. The second explanation is they were buried by a freak sandstorm. The problem again with this explanation is that a sandstorm would also lack the water to fossilize the buried specimens properly. So the second part of that question that would arise is why, if a sandstorm came upon them, why wouldn't they stop fighting? Why would they keep fighting during the sandstorm? Wouldn't they have tried to move away to safety and stop fighting because the sandstorm would have been that violent, right? The third explanation is that they sank in quicksand. Now, I love when I hear quicksand because I go back to the old Tarzan movies where quicksand seemed to be everywhere. If you grew up like I did, there was always somebody fell in quicksand in a Tarzan movie. However, quicksand doesn't seem to be the problem in the world that those Tarzans made them out to be. And then the question again is, once they started to sink, wouldn't the aggressor stop fighting and try to get to safety, and they would have separated? And so quicksand doesn't seem to be an explanation that makes sense, because then you'd have to think, okay, would that mean all the other hundreds of dinosaur finds in the Gobi Desert, wouldn't they have had to die by quicksand too? And that would have meant that quicksand would have been an enormous deal or issue in the Gobi Desert back then, because it sure isn't one now. And so you go to the Gobi Desert today, you're not finding quicksand, all right? So sadly, most people explain these finds and others similar to it that have now been discovered. They never mention the most sensible explanation of how these two dinosaurs would have been fighting, and yet they would have been buried quickly and would have died quickly. And the answer to that is it would have been the biblical flood. We know that dinosaurs were alive at the time of Noah, since they were land animals, and land animals were created on day 6 of creation week. We see that in Genesis 1, verse 24. The Genesis flood would explain how these dinosaurs would have died quickly in a sandy sediment, because the water would have helped the fossilization process, and they would have died very fast. Archaeologists have discovered fish buried so rapidly that they didn't have time to finish swallowing their dinner. We even have an likewise, we have an ichthyosaur, if I said that even remotely closely, that was found as a fossil that had not yet finished giving birth. We found one of those in the world. And so a flood would have come upon these animals very quickly. It would have buried them, and that's how they would have died quickly, and the water would have been there, and that would have aided in the fossilization process. The flood would provide the sand, the mineral-dense sediment, and the water needed to replace the bone with rocky materials, and it would also have buried these animals quickly, leaving them with little chance to escape. The evidence makes good sense when we start with the Bible to explain fossils and why we have so many fossils like this, where it seems like they were fighting. I just hope you think that the Bible makes sense. We don't have to be afraid of Scripture when we find these archaeological finds. In fact, the Bible makes more sense than what the evolutionist scientists are telling us. I hope you've enjoyed this week's segment of Bible and Science. Please remember that we Christians are never afraid of science. On the contrary, we embrace natural science because God is our creator, and there are no surprises to Him.